You must be truly desperate if you've come here for a video on how to start kart racing. After my recent run of videos, I had a few people moaning at me, telling me, why don't I do content more about how to start kart racing, blah, blah, blah. So I thought I will, actually. I'll get on with it. And this is Alan Dove's honest guide to start kart racing. Strap in. It'll be fun. And honestly, I hope I do help you on your journey into kart racing, whatever led you here. Right. First of all, I'd like to do a public apology. No doubt, if you've just ventured into this world of kart racing, you will be probably slightly overwhelmed with the plethora of classes and options. And it all seems really complicated, and any time you try and figure it out, something just comes in and kind of makes it even more confusing. So, first of all, I apologise. I'm going to do my best to kind of... Look, this ain't going to be a formal guide on how to start kart racing like you'd expect in some booklet from a governing body. I'm just going to give you my honest advice on the best way for you to get started in karting and not sink a load of cash into something that you didn't want to do. So, first bit of advice, number one. Do not buy the first car you see. And if you've bought a car and you've come across this video because you want to know how to get into kart racing, yeah, you should have watched this first. So yes, do not buy the first kart that you see. Kart classes are kind of not intuitive. So it's not like motocross where you could buy maybe a 125 two-stroke and you think, oh, I can go and race that intuitively. You think that's the way to do it, but it's not so in kart racing. So yes, do not buy the first kart that you see. Do not do it. And secondly, I'll give you a little tale. Do not buy off of the advice of one team or one team/manufacturer. A cautionary tale for you. Someone on our forum, the Karting One forum when it was alive, several years ago, came onto the forum and he said, I've bought a kart. And it's always like the alarm bells start ringing. And he said, I've ordered this kart, it's brand new chassis, brand new engine, more alarm bells are ringing. And he's going, where can I race it? And as the story unfolded, we were saying, cancel your order, cancel your order. He basically bought a car that had no club races nearby, had one national championship, which was a sort of a big time national championship that run the class. So effectively, he had nowhere to run it, and he'd spent £6,000. And he believed the person that was selling him the kart more so than us. And 2 months later, he was out of the sport, and he was thousands of pounds down. So, yes, just because one person that you might trust in a position that you might attribute trust to tells you to do something, don't do it. Just take your time, keep it easy, and just spend that month taking the advice that I'm going to give you now, and then make your decision. So that's number one. Number two. Ignore the naysayers. Before I go on to explain how karting kind of works, you would have noticed that mainstream media coverage of kart racing can often be kind of a bit skewed. What happens is that certain individuals, sometimes with products to sell, like to portray karting as a millionaire's playground. It is only a millionaire's playground in a tiny percentage of the sport. The actual majority of the sport is just ordinary people in garages, spending not much money going racing at the weekend. That's the actual truth of the sport. There's just a push to portray karting as something it isn't. It is actually just, for want of a better word, it's kind of like a working class motorsport. And I'll get flack for that, but generally speaking it is. Okay, so just ignore the naysayers. Don't get put off by these huge figures that people put out there. That's not really accurate. The majority of people that do karting do it on a very small budget and have a load of fun along the way. Just 1% are spending a huge amount because they want to get to F1. Just ignore them, ignore that, and focus on what you can afford. Number 3. Okay, so this isn't advice as such. This is more a bit of information explaining the different forms of karting on a very base level. So we sort of categorise it in 2 ways. We have arrive and drive karting, and we have owner-driver karting. So essentially, arrive and drive is you go to an indoor karting centre, they supply all of the karts, you pay the money, they give you a kart, you can either do a few laps or do a few races, and then you go home. Owner-driver, it says what it is. You own the kart, you maintain the kart yourself, and you take the kart to the track and you race it. Generally speaking, there's a huge performance difference between these 2 categories. Arrive and drive generally are low power 4-strokes. They're designed for sort of, you know, the general public to bat around on all day, whereas the owner driver stuff tends to be a bit more well, it's usually much more high performance. It's almost a different kind of sport. However, there's a bridge between the 2 where you get higher performance arrive and drive series, like Club 100, which use sort of detuned, sort of high performance 2-stroke engines. So there's a kind of bridge there. But really, what I want to focus on is the owner driver stuff. That's why you're here. If you're trying to get into arrive and drive stuff, you've probably already heard about Club 100, especially here in the UK. So I want to focus more on the owner driver stuff. Now, there's some overlap, of course, because if you're someone that races in an owner driver series, but there's teams that supply karts, they're kind of, in a way, arrive and drive in a sense. But I hope it makes sense that owner driver is you're responsible for the kart that you compete with. And generally speaking, these karts are a lot higher performance, and more akin to what you might be interested in. Okay, so point number 4. Okay, so this is where it gets really complicated. Karting has a lot of classes, and they differ regionally. They can differ from country to country and continent to continent. So back in the day, generally what we had was I'm going to oversimplify this, but we have one kind of overarching class where you had multiple engines that competed in that class, okay, from different manufacturers, and they all built engines to the technical spec of that one class, okay? So in a sense, if you came into the sport, in a sense it was easier and less complicated because you only had one choice. The difficulty came in is what engine you then choose, what manufacturer, what tuner. But actually getting into the sport and understanding it was easier. What we have now is, we have, instead of one class and many engines, we have many classes that each have one engine that can be used in that class. So, yes, it can become slightly difficult as a newcomer to understand how the sport works, because each one of those classes will have different performance characteristics. They will have different reliability aspects. Some of those classes might be more geared toward endurance, some might be more geared towards sprint. And then there's classes still that exist where you have multiple engine manufacturers building for the one class. So I understand how overwhelming it can be. And yes, that it is an unfortunate scenario, and there's no way I can make it easier for you, because when you're buying something for the first time, the fear of making the wrong decision outweighs the pleasure you get from making the right one. So all I would say is, if you are unlucky enough to buy something and it's not right for you, just take it on the chin. I hope it doesn't dissuade you from the sport. So what I want to do now is I want to try and give you some advice on how to make the right decision for you and the steps that you need to take to avoid making the wrong choice. Point number, I've lost count because I'm doing this really in my sort of fashion. I think we're on point number 5 or number 4. So point number 5, let's call it point number 5. Learning the difference between IKR and Motorsport UK racing. So if you're just coming into this, the first thing that you need to learn is, now I'm UK based, so a lot of my points here may refer to the UK, but it sort of has, it's replicated elsewhere in various forms. So in the UK, we have a motorsport governing body called Motorsport UK. They publish technical regulations and issue permits for kart racing in the UK and motorsport in general. So if you're, and they issue licenses, regulations and permits, which we kind of intuitively understand. So if you want to go and start in a particular kart class and your local club calls itself a Motorsport UK club, you're obliged to adhere to the technical regulations published by Motorsport UK. You have to have a license and the circuit and the club that runs that circuit, because usually the club hires the circuit, sometimes the club is the circuit. It's a little bit complicated, I apologise. But in essence, that's the governing body, that's how it works. Now, there's always been, in the UK at least, a thing called non-MSA, non-Motorsport UK racing, whereby a track or a club functions outside of the traditional governing body structure. And it's now known as IKR. It was on our forums on Karting One where we decided to call it IKR instead of non-MSA because we felt it seemed silly to call it non-MSA because it demeans it. And all that means is it's a club or a championship that runs outside of the remit of Motorsport UK. Generally, that means that you aren't required to have a license. The rules, sometimes they adhere to Motorsport UK, sometimes they don't. There's a bit more flexibility. You'll notice that a lot of IKR clubs will have an open class. And as I explain in a minute, that can be quite helpful. So, yes, that generally speaking, an IKR event, independent kart racing event, is a club, a track, or a series that gets its own insurance, runs the event itself, and isn't effectively subservient to Motorsport UK. And generally speaking, if we're talking about clubs, that your nearest club might be an IKR club, your nearest club might be a Motorsport UK club. Generally speaking, as a newcomer, IKR has less hurdles. You aren't required to do buy a start karting pack and all that kind of stuff. You generally speaking can just go along with novice plates and start racing very quickly. So generally speaking, an IKR club's easier to get into for a newcomer. Yes, it's one of those sort of layers again that part of the reason I don't like making these videos is because you want to make it simple, but it kind of isn't. But hopefully that explains it to a rough extent. Point number 6, I think. I don't know. So I've gone over a few things, a rough overview. But what about you? What steps do you have to take when you've made the decision you want to start kart racing? Now, I'm only going to deal with the owner driver stuff. Arrive and drive. I really like what they do, but we're going to focus on owner driver stuff. So the first thing that you need to do is find out what your local circuit is. Because your local circuit, or local circuits, dictate largely what class you can race in at a local level. Okay, so I wouldn't advise starting in a national championship straight away. Nowadays, there's kind of I guess it's over the last 5 or 6 years for a lot of newcomers to jump straight into a national championship straight away, where you're travelling around the country, and that adds quite a lot of stress and that kind of stuff to a newcomer. When you're racing locally, it's a lot easier to have bad weekends and only have a 15-minute drive home or a half an hour drive home than a 5-hour drive home, okay? And the expense is a lot easier. So the first thing that you need to do is literally go on Google and write kart clubs near me, okay? Because that is going to tell you what kart classes are available to you. Now, there's an unfortunate side effect here. It means that you're probably limited in the choice that you have. If the local clubs don't run a class that meets your budgetary needs, that's kind of unfortunate. It's the unfortunate way that the sport works. That's just the way it works, unfortunately. But first of all, it gives you the security that if you do end up buying a car, you know you've got somewhere to race. Like, it's incredibly important because you can end up buying something and find out that the clubs that run it are 200 miles away. So that's the first thing you need to do. Okay, so point number 7, which is kind of same as point number 6. I don't know what points we're on here. Okay, so you find out what your local club is. In today's environment, it's very difficult for you to actually go to the club and speak to people because of social because of social distancing and all that kind of stuff. So the next best thing is you'll probably find that club has a website, a Facebook page, and a Facebook group. Join the group if the local club has got one, and explain that you're a newcomer. And generally speaking, every club has people in there that are much more helpful than I am, and they will talk you through what is run at the club, how the club works, and what's available to you. If your local club is an IKR club like Strubby or Fullbeck, you are probably a little more shielded if you've bought a car and you're panicking about where you want to race it, because generally those clubs will have open classes and will somehow fit you in. If your local club is Motorsport UK, generally speaking, the regulations that the classes run to at those events will be a little stricter, so you do have to be a little bit more careful about buying a kart. You're probably best off looking for karts in the second-hand groups that are from competitors that race at those clubs, because you know 99% of the time that they will adhere to the technical regulations. Yes, so that's your next step. That's the best thing for you to do. Okay, point number 8. Are we on point number 8? God. Tough. You have to live with it. This is all you got. How much do you need to spend? So the car that I've got behind me, I'm rebuilding it at the moment, cost me £600. It needed a little bit of extra spend, so let's say 700 quid. So I can buy a full kart for 700 quid and get started. Okay. Now, one of the things that you will need to be careful of when before I go into the budgetary thing is if you're buying a car, you kind of need local support or some ability to know that you can buy spares. So if you buy a kart chassis and you can't find the manufacturer's dealer here in the UK or what country you're in, you might find that spares are a little bit complicated to get hold of. It's not usually the case, but generally speaking, if you get an idea of what chassis are run at your local club, you know that if you buy a kart that's of that brand, you're going to be okay. But yeah, back to the budget. So I can spend 700 quid and get a full kart. That's kind of ready to go. So if you're looking at budget, your bottom end can be like even lower than that, but like 600-700, you get a good deal, real good deal. Or you can buy a brand new kart for 3 or 4 grand. Okay, the benefits of buying brand new. The only benefit really as a newcomer is you know that 100% that everything about the kart works. And if anything goes wrong, you can go right back to the person you bought it from and go, that's wrong. If you're buying second hand, it's always a little bit of a gamble. But that's part of the journey. You need to learn. You need to learn things, and you need to learn what goes wrong. And sometimes when you buy new, you get into a cycle of just spending and spending and spending, and before long you've run out of money. So the only downsides of buying a second hand, apart from you don't know if it's 100% reliable. Generally speaking, there's not many deals in karting that you get totally ripped off. These are high performance engines. They can break. So that's just part of the game. You might find little kind of things like in Motorsport UK, you have to have front nose cone that are kind of not collapsible, but there's a hinge that if you hit someone, it knocks back. So if you buy a car that doesn't have that on the front, you might find yourself having to spend a little bit of money bringing it up to spec. But generally speaking, you know, you £1,000, what's that, $1,500 if you're in America. That's kind of the ballpark that you need to be in for your first car. Like you all, and you know, you'll hear these big like numbers about £250,000 being spent, and 300 grand that you hear on TV and on the media. It's not really like that at all. I can buy this car for £700 and I'll probably sell it for £700, and the only cost is the use. So budget wise, yeah, anything between £700 and £1,500, you should be able to buy your first car. In terms of helmets and suits, helmets, I'd say spend whatever money you can. There's no point shortchanging yourself there. Second-hand boots, you can probably find pretty cheap if they're in your size, if you don't mind wearing second-hand boots. Suits, again, suits have to adhere to a particular standard in regulated kart racing. So you do have to check up on the regulations. I know this is a headache. Some IKR series don't mind so much. Older suits can be used, but in governing kart series where you have a governing body, there is regulations. You just ask questions. Never be afraid to ask questions. Like this is I'm going to sort of venture off doing numbers and points because my brain can't really work like that. I prefer just riffing. Don't worry about asking stupid questions. There used to be more forums. I know Kart Pulse is still going strong, but like karting.co.uk, my forum, Karting One, they're all pretty dead now. Even eKarting News in America. So it's difficult for newcomers to find sort of singular places where everybody is. So it's harder to ask questions, weirdly, now with like the growth of social media. You'd think it'd be easier, but it isn't. So you just have to look at your local clubs, look up their groups on Facebook. Sometimes they're barren, sometimes they're full. Just ask as many questions as you can. Don't be afraid of asking stupid questions because we've all been there. I still ask stupid questions. So yes, don't be afraid to ask stupid questions. Okay, what next? I've got this piece of paper. I thought I was being organised, but I'm not. Yeah. So how to end this? I hope that all I want to say to you is, yes, it can be complicated, but just remember the main points. Don't buy the first kart you see. Find out where your local tracks are. Find out what classes are raced at your local track, and then go from there. There are other things that you might need to consider as well. You might be more interested in endurance racing, okay? So you might be interested in high-performance endurance racing, something like the OEKC would fulfill your needs, or you might be interested in ultra-long 24-hour races, where you require sort of a thing called a pro kart. Pro karts, despite their name, are not the fastest. They're, in fact, almost the slowest form of owner-driver karting, because they use sort of you say twin-engine pro kart, and you think, wow, that's got to be the fastest kart. And it's like, no, it's the slowest kart generally. But they're low-power Honda 4-stroke engines that you can race in various ways. Generally endurance, because they're generator engines. They'll go on forever. So yeah, I'm not going to be able to give you every answer you need because karting has got more complicated over the years for newcomers. But on the flip side, it means you've got more choice, and you should be able to find something that suits your need. You might like historic racing. You might look up retro racer. You know, and there is a myriad of options. But what I will say to you is ask as many questions as you can. Do not buy the first kart that you see. And, you know, whatever you buy, even if you make a fuck up, enjoy it, you know, get what you can out of it, get those first few practice days and first few races out of the way, and then when you really know the sport, you can make 100% the right choice for you. So even if you do make the wrong choice, don't worry, take it on the chin, carry on, You'll get to know the sport as you go. Okay, there's so much expertise on the internet. If you buy something from 1985, trust me, that we are there to help you on how to run it. Maybe not me, because I can't be bothered anymore. I'm getting too old. But there is plenty of people out there. Yeah, I hope this isn't too confusing. I wanted to make it simple, and it isn't. That's just tough. But you asked for it. A lot of you asked for it, so here it is. My Alan Dove's guide to how to start kart racing. Thanks for watching, and yeah, see you soon.